He stripped her dignity. She swore to strip his kingdom. No throne is safe when a queen is humiliated in public. No law of men, no pact of brothers, no silence of gods could erase what was done to her that day. Draupadi, the empress of the Pandavas, was dragged into the royal court, not as a queen, not as a wife, not even as a woman, but as a trophy of a wicked game. Before kings, elders, and sages, her question echoed like thunder. Am I the wife of 5 warriors, or the slave of 1 gambler? No one dared answer, but the silence spoke. It mocked her, and from that silence, a fire was born. She did not cry. She did not plead. She made a vow soaked in rage, stained in shame, and destined to shake empires. Because that day, the war of Mahabharata truly began, not with weapons, but with a woman's wrath. She was born from fire, not as a child of the earth, nor of man and woman, but from the sacred flames of a yajna. Draupadi was not merely a princess, she was a divine embodiment of destiny itself. Her beauty was otherworldly, her presence impossible to ignore. But what made her unforgettable was not her face, it was her fire. The sages called her Krishna, the Dark One, not for her complexion, but for the storm that lived inside her. She was born with a purpose. And that purpose, though hidden at first, would one day ignite a war that even the gods feared. She was gifted to King Draupadi, a man burning with vengeance, and raised in a palace built on the ruins of pride. She watched men wage wars for ego, for land, for honor, but her heart longed for something deeper: truth. Her Swayamvara, the ceremony to choose her husband, was a test of skill, but also of fate. The one who won her hand was not a prince in silk robes, but a warrior in disguise. Arjuna, son of Kunti, one of the 5 Pandava brothers. And when the brothers returned home, their mother, unaware of the situation, spoke a fateful line: "Whatever you have brought, share it equally." Thus, Draupadi became the wife of 5. She accepted her dharma, not as a burden, but as a sacred duty. Each brother loved her, honored her, protected her. She was the center of their world, the queen of their rising empire Indraprastha, a kingdom built with divine help, blessed by Krishna himself. And for a time, the world knew peace. Her palace, made of illusions and crystal, was the marvel of the age. Even gods walked its halls in awe. But not all eyes looked upon her with reverence. In the shadows, jealousy festered. Duryodhana, the prince of Hastinapura, burned with envy. His pride was wounded by illusions he could not understand. He laughed when he fell on what he thought was water, and Draupadi's words, sharp as thunder, echoed in his mind forever. The blind son of a blind king. From that moment, his desire for revenge turned into obsession. The game was set. The dice rolled, and the Pandavas, noble as they were, fell into the trap. Draupadi did not gamble. She did not sit at the table. But it was her dignity they wagered and lost. The fire that gave her life would soon ask for blood. The air in the royal court of Hastinapura was thick with silence. Not the silence of peace, but the kind that comes before a storm. The dice had fallen. The stakes had been raised beyond comprehension. One by one, the Pandavas had lost everything: their kingdom, their wealth, their honor, and finally, shockingly, even themselves. Each bet, each throw, had stripped them not just of possession, but of dignity. But Shakuni, the master manipulator, was not done. And Duryodhana, whose pride was now thirsting for revenge, craved more. Then came the unthinkable. In one final throw of poison-coated dice, Yudhishthira staked and lost Draupadi. A gasp ran through the court, like wind through a dying flame. A queen gambled away. The empress of Indraprastha, born of divine fire, reduced to a wager in a crooked game. Bhishma's face darkened. Vidura looked away in horror. Even Drona, the great teacher, remained frozen. But none of them spoke. None of them stopped it, and that silence would become the wound of an age. From the shadowed corridors of the palace, the order was given: bring her. Dushasana, drunk on power and vengeance, stormed into her chambers like a beast unchained. Draupadi, unaware of the treachery unfolding in the court, stood with grace befitting a queen, but what greeted her was not honor, it was chains. He seized her by the hair, her crown, her pride, and dragged her through the hallways of the palace, through the corridors lined with trembling servants, into the heart of darkness. She did not scream. Even as her silks dragged across the stone, even as her hair was torn from its knot, even as her dignity was bruised by the hands of wickedness, she did not scream. She asked a question so sharp, so righteous, that it split the soul of the Saba. Did you lose me before you lost yourself, Yudhishthira? If you are no longer a free man, how could you stake me? And no one answered. Kings sat in silence. Elders stared at the floor. The court of Hastinapura, once a symbol of justice, was now a pit of cowards swallowing its own shame. The goddess of righteousness had entered their hall, and no one stood to honor her. Instead, Duryodhana laughed, a vile, hollow laugh. He slapped his thigh and said, "Come, Draupadi, sit here, on the lap of your new master." What followed should never be forgotten. Dushasana advanced toward her again, fueled by the madness of a man no longer human. He gripped the end of her sari and pulled. The act was meant to strip her of clothing, but it stripped the court of illusion. Draupadi, eyes closed, arms raised, prayed not to any god in general, but to Krishna. Her soul reached beyond the walls, beyond time, beyond fear, and he answered. As Dushasana pulled, the fabric flowed, endless, infinite. The sari did not end, no matter how violently he tried to expose her. It was as if the divine itself had decided. You will not shame her, you will only shame yourselves. The more he pulled, the more he fell into despair. The court watched, stunned. A miracle was unfolding, and still, none moved. When Dushasana collapsed, panting like a beast that had failed to conquer a goddess, Draupadi stood like fire that had never gone out. Her hair disheveled, her soul blazing. She turned not to her husbands, not to the king, but to the heavens, and she spoke a vow. I swear, before gods and men, before sages and sinners, I shall not bind my hair again until it is soaked with the blood of Dushasana. Her voice was not trembling, it was thunder. Her eyes did not weep, they burned. This was not the grief of a broken woman. This was the wrath of the divine feminine, Shakti unleashed. A force older than creation, awakened not by violence but by injustice. And now, the wheels of fate had begun to turn. Bhima, enraged beyond words, stood. His voice roared across the hall. I swear, Draupadi, by my ancestors, by my strength, I shall tear Duryodhana's thigh and drink Dushasana's blood like nectar. Your vow shall be fulfilled, or I shall fall before you. Even Arjuna, the calm warrior, clenched his fists. Even Yudhishthira, tormented by his failure, bowed his head in silence, but none of it could undo what was done. A queen had been dragged, a goddess had been defiled, and in trying to shame her, they had dishonored themselves. In that court, justice died. But in that same moment, destiny was born. Because from Draupadi's vow, the Mahabharata was no longer just a story of rivalry between cousins. It became a sacred war, a war of restoration, of karmic retribution, of dharma rising from the ashes of cowardice. Draupadi was no longer just a wife of the Pandavas. She had become the womb of war, the flame that no kingdom could extinguish. And until her vow was fulfilled, no peace could last, no kingdom could rest. Because it was not just a woman who had been wronged, it was righteousness itself. The vow was made. The silence had been shattered. But what followed was not immediate war, it was something far more cruel. Time. 13 years passed. Years of exile, years of wandering in forests, wearing bark instead of silk, living in caves instead of palaces. Years where kings became outcasts, and a queen born of fire was forced to sleep under trees while the memory of her humiliation burned inside her like a slow, sacred flame. But Draupadi did not forget. She did not move on. She did not heal in the way the world expected. because there are wounds that don't close with time. Wounds that are not meant to be erased, but transformed. Draupadi's pain became a force of clarity. She did not drown in grief, she rose in resolve. Her silence became meditation. Her rage, a compass. Her shame, a sword. She was no longer just waiting for justice. She had become justice. Living, breathing, relentless. In every legend of ancient India, Draupadi is remembered for that moment, not for her palace, not for her beauty, but for her vow. Because her pain was not just personal, it was cosmic. She had become the voice of every woman silenced by power, every queen reduced to property, every soul betrayed by those sworn to protect her. Her humiliation was not hers alone. It was a mirror held up to an that claimed to uphold dharma, yet chose convenience over courage. The men of the court, great warriors and sages, had bowed to politics, but Draupadi bowed to no one. That is the deeper sin of the Sabha, not just what Dushasana did, but what everyone else did not do. In their silence, the great men became small, and in her cry, one woman became immortal. This is where the Mahabharata transcends mere epic. It becomes scripture, a spiritual confrontation between appearance and essence, between duty and fear, between law and justice. Draupadi, in her fury, was not simply calling for revenge. She was invoking a forgotten order, a divine reckoning. Her vow was not a curse. It was a summons. Even Krishna, the supreme being, did not silence her. He did not say, "Calm down, Draupadi." He did not urge forgiveness or restraint. He stood with her, because her rage was not selfish, it was sacred. In many traditions, anger is seen as a flaw, but in the Mahabharata, Draupadi's fury becomes something holy. It is not the rage of ego, it is the fire of violated truth. The feminine divine, long domesticated and silenced, rises in her in full force. And this is a terrifying truth for those in power, a woman who no longer seeks as a woman who can change the world. And so she did. The war of Kurukshetra, often described in terms of celestial weapons and divine warriors, was in truth the fruit of her vow. Every arrow shot, every chariot burned, every king slain, it was all rooted in that court, that day, that moment. The battlefield did not begin on the soil of Kurukshetra. It began in Draupadi's heart. A war born not from ambition, but from desecration. Even the gods knew. Her vow had to be fulfilled, or Dharma would never rise again. When Bhima finally ripped open Dushasana's chest in the heat of battle, he did not hesitate. He tore the heart from the body like one offering tribute to a goddess. And then, true to his word, he brought the blood to Draupadi. She stood still, unmoved by the violence, for her soul had waited for this fulfillment. And in that moment, as she finally washed her hair in the blood of her enemy, the vow was complete. It is a disturbing image, and yet deeply symbolic. Because Draupadi was not washing herself in blood out of hatred. She was reclaiming her soul. Her act was not vengeance, it was restoration. In ancient symbolism, the hair of a woman represents her vitality, her dignity, her spiritual power. By refusing to tie it for 13 years, she had kept her wound visible. She wore her pain like a banner. And when she finally washed it, not in water, but in justice, she reconnected with her wholeness. This is what makes Draupadi more than a myth. She is archetype. She is every voice that rose from ashes, every woman who refused to stay silent, every soul who turned pain into prophecy. And yet, the tragedy remains, because even after the war, even after justice was served, peace did not come easily. The world had changed. The cost was immeasurable. Sons had died. Lineages were broken. And Draupadi, who had ignited the fire, now sat amid the ruins. She had won, but at what price? This is the burden of righteous fury. It does not destroy only the guilty. It shakes the entire foundation. It forces truth to rise, but truth always comes with a cost. Draupadi carried that cost, not as regret, but as remembrance. In the end, the Mahabharata reminds us, Dharma is not always gentle. Sometimes it roars. Sometimes it wears the face of a woman in agony, eyes blazing, hair unbound. Sometimes it refuses forgiveness, because some wounds must not be forgotten. Draupadi's story is not just a tale of revenge. It is a revelation. that the soul of a woman, when set on fire by injustice, can become the voice of the divine itself. They called it a war between kings. But it began with a woman's vow. Draupadi was not armed with weapons. She had no army, no throne, no divine weapons forged by gods. All she had was memory. And memory, when it refuses to be silenced, becomes prophecy. Her humiliation was meant to end her story, but it became the spark that rewrote fate itself. And now, centuries later, we must ask, what do we do with her story? Do we see Draupadi as a symbol of vengeance or as a mirror? Because the truth is, her story is not only about the past. It is about every silence tolerated in the name of tradition, every injustice hidden behind sacred words, every time power mocked dignity and got away with it, until someone said, "No more." In Draupadi's refusal to forgive what was unforgivable, there is something unsettling, but also something liberating. She teaches us that not all peace is holy, that sometimes silence is sin, that anger, when born from the soul, is not destruction, it is alignment. She did not seek revenge to satisfy her ego. She sought justice to restore the soul of the world. And maybe that's why her story still lives, because she represents the moment when the divine feminine stopped waiting to be saved and became the savior. So now, I ask you, have you ever silenced your own pain to keep the peace? Have you ever been told to move on when your soul was still bleeding? And if justice came at a cost, would you still want it? Draupadi did. And in doing so, she became not just a character in a great epic, but a force that still haunts the conscience of the world. Now tell me in the comments, was her vow a divine act of justice or the beginning of endless destruction? What would you have done in her place? If this story moved something in you, share it. Let more people remember the fire that once walked among kings and reminded them that the wrath of a woman is not weakness. It is divine, it is eternal, and it will never be silenced.